the Beltline, and we ended on expanding the idea with this picture of Ryan Gravel, whose idea it was walking on the old freight train tracks where the East Side Trail is now open and has been since 2012. And the fact that this began as a City of Atlanta initiative in 2005 in Shirley Franklin's administration. Now let's talk about who is the Beltline. This is the organizational structure. There are 3 project sponsors: Fulton County, the City of Atlanta, and Atlanta Public Schools. And I just realized I didn't make my cursor large and yellow, so I hope you'll be able to see it smaller and white. But the 3 project sponsors are the sponsors because all 3 of those government entities get some of their revenue from City of Atlanta property taxes, and the 3 entities had to agree to defer increased tax revenue based on redevelopment around the Beltline. And we're going to talk more about that. But that's why those 3 entities are project sponsors. Now, Invest Atlanta is Atlanta's development authority, and it's the public redevelopment authority that provides oversight for the tax allocation district. And we're going to talk more about the tax allocation district in just a minute. All 3 of these entities existed before the Beltline became an official project and will exist after the Beltline is no longer a project because it is finished. Now, the next thing that happened is that a private nonprofit partnership was set up, the Atlanta Beltline Partnership, this green, not quite square. It is a private organization that was set up by a number of movers and shakers in private business in Atlanta, because Atlanta city government often calls on private sector to help out with major initiatives. And the private sector said they wanted to help with the Beltline, and they set up this private nonprofit partnership. That was actually set up in 2005, right as it was became an official city project. The next entity that was set up is Atlanta Beltline Incorporated. This is the logo, and it's often shortened as ABI, or Atlanta Beltline Inc. And they are also a private nonprofit redevelopment corporation, and they are the implementation agent for the Beltline. They are the folks that are in charge of making sure this happens, that it gets built, that everything gets done in the way it's supposed to. And the Atlanta Beltline Inc. was set up in legislation passed by the Atlanta City Council, and it was set up in 2006, and it's supposed to sunset when the tax allocation district sunsets in 2030. So these two entities may go away in 2030, and we'll have to get there and see what happens in terms of what the city council wants done. So that is one way of looking at who is the Atlanta Beltline. Now let's talk a little bit more about the Atlanta Beltline Partnership, the public-facing nonprofit organization, but it's funded entirely through private endeavors. They bring the bus tours. Here's a picture of folks going on one of the bus tours with the tour guide leading the tours. That's what I've been doing since 2012. Now, it helps keep the Atlanta Beltline vision on track, by enabling construction of more parks and trails through private fundraising, by engaging the public through the tours, health and fitness programs that we'll talk more about, and they empower the Atlanta Beltline neighborhood residents to connect with affordable housing, economic development, urban revitalization, and a healthy lifestyle. And we'll talk more about how they do that as we go through. They work with neighborhoods, businesses, community and faith organizations, and other groups. They raise awareness and broad-based support for the Beltline. Now, Atlanta Beltline, Inc., the entity that's overseeing the planning and execution of the vision, they represent the public side of the public-private partnership. And I couldn't find a picture, a group picture of everybody that is an employee of ABI. It's about 45 people. And the group picture that I found was so old that there had been a bunch of turnover since then, and it wasn't really appropriate to show that picture. So I had to go in and pull some headshots of some of the executives that are in leadership positions in ABI. And I'm not going to give myself a test today and try to remember each of these persons' names and titles. So I'm just going to show you that it is a very diverse organization, and I'm going to tell you the types of positions that are at the top of the organization. The Chief Executive Officer, the Chief Operating Officer, the Chief Financial Officer, the person who is in charge of the planning and execution over all of the project management, a senior landscape architect who has been with the project the whole time. He is one of the longest serving members of ABI. This is also a very long-serving member of ABI. She is in charge of a number of different things, including a huge community engagement program that we'll talk more about. This is another landscape architect who is very involved in the actual project management of individual construction projects. Here is the person who is in charge of affordable housing for the Beltline. Here is the person who is in charge of art on the Beltline. And this woman is in charge of equity and inclusivity around the Beltline. I talked last week about the vision that got added to the key themes when it became clear how important community engagement and equity, working against the negative parts of gentrification would be. And this is the person who was hired to be in charge of that. Now, they work closely with the City of Atlanta to define the details of the plan, to secure public funding, whether it's federal, state, city, or regional, or other types of local funding. And they do the project management. They work real closely with city departments like Parks, Public Works, Watershed Management, and regional agencies and state and federal agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency at both the state and the federal levels, the Federal Transit Administration, the Georgia Department of Transportation, the Atlanta Regional Commission. And their work includes land use planning, design, environmental cleanup, construction, as well as affordable housing policy and art on the Beltline. So it's a huge job that they only have 45 people to help make happen. And of course, those 45 people don't do it all. They contract out to the private sector with a lot of companies to help make this happen. Architecture and landscape architecture firms, construction firms, all kinds of different private sector employers. but ABI is the entity that is in charge. Now we're going to talk more about the tax allocation district, and this is important enough that I may mention it nearly every class. I showed you a map last week of the tax allocation district for the Beltline, where you saw the Beltline outline in green and all of the commercial and industrial properties that look like orange blobs around the green Beltline corridor. This is another way of looking at tax allocation districts because there is more than one for the city of Atlanta. And I got this rendering from the Invest Atlanta website because they're in charge of the tax allocation districts for the city. And the one that may resonate most with many of you is the Atlantic Station tax allocation district. You all may know about Atlantic Station and that it was the Atlantic Steel Company long before it was Atlantic Station. The steel company closed down. One of my best friend's father was an engineer with them for his whole career. But after they closed, the land just lay vacant for years because it was environmentally contaminated and it was going to cost enough money to clean it up before it could be redeveloped that most private developers did not want to take that on. So the city of Atlanta designated it a tax allocation district. And next I'm going to talk about how that brings in money. But it brought in money to help start off the environmental remediation, the cleanup, and to help encourage developers to invest in that location. And the result of that is that we now have a very vibrant new retail and commercial and residential district in the city of Atlanta called Atlantic Station. There's also an East Side TAD, a West Side TAD, a Perry Bolton TAD, and a Princeton Lakes TAD. And you'll notice all of these other TADs are pretty much contiguous parcels of land. They are, an odd-shaped blob, but the blob is generally one piece. However, the Beltline TAD is this blue that looks like a series of lakes and streams around the city of Atlanta. And those aren't water features, even though they look like it on this map. This is the same TAD as you saw in the orange blobs on the previous map. Now, the TAD was set up in 2005, and it has been expected to generate about 1/3 of the total cost. Now, how is it going to do that? Let's look again at the map with the orange blobs. And you've already seen the information in writing, so I'm just going to talk to try to explain this. These are commercial and industrial developments that are underutilized. I've got my phone on vibrate, and for some reason it's ringing anyway. Excuse me. We'll go back to this map, and these underutilized, abandoned, formerly industrial and commercial properties in the TAD were already paying taxes to the city of Atlanta when this was set up in 2005. But because they were underutilized, there wasn't much that was very valuable except for just the land in these areas. So they weren't bringing in large amounts of revenue through property taxes. The property taxes were depressed because the utilization of the land was very low. But as these areas are redeveloped, they will become worth more to the city, and they will get reassessed for their tax basis, and the city will be generating more taxes on these properties based on their higher usage. For example, say one of these areas down here in southeast Atlanta, that's a pretty big orange blob right there. Say that was bringing in, oh, I'm going to make this real easy, but it's not going to match up with the size of the land. Say this was generating $1,000 in property taxes. I'm sure it was generating more than that, but to make the analogy easy, $1,000 in property taxes, and the land pretty much looks abandoned. There aren't any operational businesses or commerce or industry on that land. Well, the owners get approached a couple of years into the Beltline development by a private developer who wants to buy this underutilized group of parcels of land. And the sellers say, you bet, we'll be glad to sell this. So they sell it to developers, and the developers come in and they clean it up. They end up building buildings that are for commercial or light industrial or industry of some kind that, you know, are match the zoning for the land. But they also, in many instances, build mixed use buildings, which means there may be restaurants and coffee shops and other things in the bottom of the building. And then there may be condos or apartments on the upper floors. And at the time that building opens, the city reassesses what the owners need to be paying in taxes. If they had been getting $1,000 in taxes, say they're going to get $10,000 in taxes. Again, I know that's very low. It's just to make the numbers easy for me to do in my head. So all along, the city has been getting $1,000 for that taxes on that piece of property. After it's redeveloped, $10,000 are coming in. The difference between $1,000 and $10,000 is $9,000. The city, Fulton County, and the public schools still get the $1,000 every year. The extra $9,000 that goes into the city goes in to help pay for construction of the Beltline. So that's how the tax allocation district is supposed to bring in 1/3 of the cost of what it's going to cost to build the Beltline. And if I didn't make that clear enough, you can ask me questions at the end. Oh, and in addition, let me go back just 1 minute. They can use the revenue as soon as it comes in to do something, or they can bond against future tax allocation revenue. The city of Atlanta can let bonds against future revenue. And when they do that, 15% of the net bond revenue goes into a fund called the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So if they were to bond $10,000, and of course that's a very low number, it's going to be much higher than that, but if they were to bond $10,000, 15% of that, or $1,500, would go into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to help create and preserve affordable housing around the Beltline. The TAD gets very complicated. Okay, now this is a photo of historic Fourth Ward Park as it was being built, with a grassy entrance off of North Avenue right across from Ponce City Market. So this street down here at the bottom of the picture, that's North Avenue, and Ponce City Market is right on the other side. And this is the entrance to historic Fourth Ward Park. And here is a water retention feature that looks like a 2-acre lake that was installed to help alleviate the stormwater runoff and sewage backup problems all over the east side of Atlanta because we have very old stormwater and sewage infrastructure. And you see new residences popping up and being built all around. However, this is a very old picture. And if you look at the background that I have up behind my head today, so that you're not looking at my kitchen cabinets, this is that water feature in historic Fourth Ward Park with Ponce City Market in the background and an amphitheater for performances in front of the water feature, walking trails around it. It's just absolutely beautiful. It opened in 2011, so it's been around for 9 years. Now, I'm not going to read all of these inspirational quotes that I have here on the side of the slide, but they are from a past Atlanta Beltline Inc. president and CEO, a past Atlanta City Council member, and the person who is the CEO of the Atlanta Beltline Partnership, the executive director. And they illustrate, as you read those, the tagline up here on the top, where Atlanta comes together. As I mentioned, this is the logo, and often a logo will have a saying or motto that goes along with the logo, and that is what it is for the Beltline, where Atlanta comes together. We talked about how connectivity is one of the key themes last week, and this is an example of how important that connectivity is, that it's a place that public infrastructure can bring Atlanta together in a very powerful way, like Martin Luther King and his idea of a beloved community. And that this is not just a transformational project, it's an inspirational project. Now, I was going to try to show you a video, and Peggy had offered to help me with that. But Peggy, I have learned that the software that I'm using, my 2010 version of Office, as of this year, no longer will support showing videos or clicking on a link and taking you somewhere. So I'm going to have to buy new software. But I was afraid to do that in the middle of a class in case it messed up all of my slides. So I'm sticking with my old software, and I'm going to tell you about the video and exactly how you can go see it after the class. So
go ahead.
Little piece of homework. Type into your browser www, not right now, but just write this down, www.beltline, all one word, BELTLINE.org, O-R-G, beltline.org. That's the home page. And on the home page, there is a very brightly covered photo right on the left side of the page that has got an arrow in the middle of it. And you click on that arrow and you'll watch a 3 to 4 minute video about the Atlanta Beltline that I think very well illustrates the tagline, where Atlanta comes together. Now, we are going to now go back in time, do a little bit of time traveling this morning, and look at historic freight rail in Atlanta, because those historic freight rail corridors are what gives us the opportunity for the Beltline. And here is a picture of the 0 milepost between Central and Pryor down at Underground Atlanta. This was the 0 milepost that was put in for the terminus for the railroads in Atlanta. Now, Atlanta did not exist before 1837. And the reason Georgia existed, but Atlanta did not. And other cities did, Savannah, Macon, Chattanooga in Tennessee on the border, and railroads were building from those places. But nobody had chosen where the terminus for those railroads was going to be, and they gave that job to an Army engineer. And in 1837, he drove a stake in the ground for the terminus, and it was just near today's Five Points, near the Five Points MARTA station and the Five Points area downtown. Now, 2 years later, in 1839, some homes and a store were built, and it was called Thrasherville, this little community, because there was a Mr. Thrasher that worked for the railroad. But it soon began being called by the name Terminus because of the terminus marker. And by 1842, Terminus had 6 whole buildings and 30 residents. Can you imagine 30 residents in Atlanta? And it was renamed Marthasville after the daughter of a governor of Georgia. Now, rail from Augusta to Marthasville was completed in 1845 when the suggestion was named to rename the town one more time. And you may find it hard to believe what the suggestion was. I just couldn't believe it when I read this. They suggested naming our town Atlantica Pacifica. Aren't you glad we dodged that? In 1847, we were just incorporated as Atlanta. And by 1854, we had rail lines coming in from the east, the northwest, the southeast, and the southwest. So let's talk about how we became a rail hub. It turns out the Piedmont area, with its hills and valleys in Georgia, is a great place to build railroad tracks because you can build on a ridge. We got lots of ridges, and that's a good place to put in a railroad track. So between 1854 and this picture of a downtown in 1887, it just grew by leaps and bounds. By 1860, the state could claim more rail lines than any other state in the Deep South. And Georgia had linked all of its major towns by rail and had a new rail center with the city of Atlanta. And the rapidly growing city of Atlanta became the rail hub for the entire southern United States, which is why the Union Army targeted Atlanta and its railroads in the Civil War to get rid of as much as they could, because they were an asset to the Confederacy. You know what happened in the Civil War. After the Civil War, this was such a good place for a town and trains, they just started rebuilding almost immediately. And by 1837, it looked like this downtown with these tall multi-story buildings. And look at all of these different lines of railroad tracks for both freight trains and passenger trains. Now, the rail hub got so congested, and of course, this terminal no longer exists. We tore it down. It became so congested that we had to do something about that. So let's talk about how we solved that congestion problem in the latter half of the 1800s. Between 1871 and 1908, rail companies started building what were called belt lines. It's not a new name, it's been around for 150 years. So what happened is that they built these not main tracks, but just little spur tracks on the outskirts of town. And at that time, the outskirts of Atlanta were no more than 2 to 3 miles away from Five Points. So that wasn't very far out, but that was the outskirts. And they used those belt lines to connect to the main tracks and move trains away from downtown congestion for loading and unloading goods. Passengers didn't use the belt lines. Passenger trains still came into the main depot downtown. Now, along these belt lines or spur railroad tracks, a lot of industries and warehouses were built. And 4 different companies built the rail lines, and they weren't built to connect up because no railroad needed to send one of their freight trains in a circle all the way around the city of Atlanta, just like we don't need to get on 285 and drive all the way around it unless we're really lost. We use the part of 285 that we need, and we get off as soon as we can. And that's exactly what the railroads did with their freight trains. Now, the Beltline infrastructure is still there, as you can see in this picture from April 2012 from the Southern Railway Beltline just east of Piedmont Park. And all of this infrastructure was really used by industrial-based businesses that thrived close into town and really used freight rail for transport of goods. But as times and businesses changed, so has a lot of that transport. And a lot of that transport is done by trucks and UPS and Amazon vehicles, things like that nowadays. As a result, many of these belt lines are no longer used. You can see a train could not use these tracks. They've put in these wooden posts to line the road to keep people in the roadway into Piedmont Park's parking garage. And it's clear that this track is abandoned, but the corridor is still there. Now let's look at another view that I really like. This is a before and after shot. Of course, this is before of the corridor. If you were standing on Edgewood Avenue's bridge and looking south towards Reynoldstown to the MARTA elevated rail up here, right at the skyline, and the Halsey Freight Yard right on the other side of DeKalb Avenue, that huge piggyback freight yard that was over there in right beside Inman Park and Reynoldstown. And you know, if you've used DeKalb Avenue, how hard it can be to get from the north side to the south side, because DeKalb Avenue has very few places where you can cross the tracks at grade or go under a tunnel with a bridge to get you under Halsey Yard. So this is what it looked like not that long ago. When I first started going to Beltline meetings, this before picture is exactly what it looked like. Now, this is a rendering of what they expected it to look like after a new development came in. A new development bought property along the corridor from the people who owned the industry and commercial land. And this was developed, it's called the Edge. And this rendering looks almost exactly like what it actually looks like today. If you were to drive down Edgewood Avenue going into town from Inman Park, this would be on your left. If you were driving out of town toward Inman Park on Edgewood Avenue, this would be on your right. Now, the corridors that we see here from the railroads and later the interstate highways and the state roads like DeKalb Avenue and MARTA have to a large extent articulated how our neighborhoods developed around all that over time and how the landscape that resulted has really hampered our ability to travel efficiently in the city. Using DeKalb Avenue is a good example of inefficient use of mobility around town. But these historic rail lines are a great backbone for a new transit and trail system to reconnect many of our neighborhoods and increase our mobility around the city. And the project can spur new growth of commercial, residential, and retail development and provide an effective way for us to address some of our big challenges that y'all are very well aware of: traffic congestion in town, population growth in the city, and widely uneven commercial development in different parts of the city. North, east, south, and west are very different in terms of their commercial and retail development. Okay, so I often get asked in my face-to-face classes, is anybody else doing anything like this? And the answer is yes, but not as big as the Atlanta Beltline project. But real quickly, let's talk about the High Line in New York. It's a almost 1.5 mile long linear park and greenway. 1.5 miles. Beltline is 22 miles. The Promenade Plante in Paris, right here, diagonally in this picture. That is an almost 3-mile elevated linear park built on top of an obsolete railway infrastructure in Paris. Now, it's been around a long time, pre-Beltline. It was there in 1993. So it was there when Ryan Gravel lived in Paris, working on his degree from Georgia Tech. Now, this is in Philadelphia. This is called the Viaduct, and this is an early picture of what it looked like before it was turned into an elevated trail. It goes into the center city of Philadelphia and has been around for about 100 years. And it's a 1-mile elevated track that goes through redeveloping and diverse neighborhoods. And a modern picture of this would show that it is being developed, but it's only a 1-mile track. Here is the Bloomingdale line, which is a 2.7-mile elevated railroad track running east-west on the north side of Chicago. So Chicago is doing some of this too, but again, it's a shorter elevated railroad section that's abandoned. And then this is Los Angeles. As you may know, the Los Angeles River has basically been concreted in over the years. It's over here in between these banks of concrete. And for the first time since the 1930s, a 2.5-mile section right here with this bike and walking path that you see here was open to the public for recreational use in 2013. And this is in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is one of the longer ones, a 5.7-mile rail trail that's used both recreationally and for a lot of bicycle commuting in Minneapolis. So these are some examples of other places. But nobody has as long a section of belt lines that connect up around the city. Nobody is putting in all the things the Beltline is: parks, trails, transit, an arboretum, art on the Beltline, all of these elements that we've talked about over the last class. Now we're going to talk real quickly about a few things before I open it up for questions. These are a little bit more in-depth detail about some of the key elements that we addressed or mentioned last week. Sustainability and environmental remediation. The target and the status is located here. And these small pictures may be a little hard to see. This is the East Side Trail prior to it being remediated in 2010. This is the East Side Trail right after it opened in 2012. And this is what a rendering looks like when the trail is totally finished and the arboretum is planted and there is actually transit in alongside the trail. Don't have that yet. We're protecting water resources. A lot of the parks and areas that have plantings have big underground water tanks that collect rainwater that then is used for watering the planting. So we're not just taking water from the City of Atlanta water supply. And we're doing things like these water retention ponds to help extend the life of our very old stormwater and sewage infrastructure and making it a beautiful park in the process. Now, I'll mention here in this picture, before the trail was able to be laid, they had to haul out 17,000 tons, I'm sorry, not 1,000, 1,700 tons of contaminated soil that had petroleum products and creosote and all kinds of other chemicals in the ground. And that was 1,700 tons just for 2¼ miles. So let's talk about other types of sustainability and environmental remediation efforts. Organic land care is being implemented in all the new parks, using a herd of goats to get rid of the weeds and the kudzu instead of coming in and spraying it all with chemicals. They're using dynamic soil biology to reduce the need for irrigation and pesticides and herbicides while controlling runoff. Native and naturalized plants. That is what's being planted. We're not planting invasive plants or things that won't survive in the Atlanta climate, which is very changeable, as you know. And the native and naturalized plants will require less maintenance. Now, green demolition, I had no idea what that was before I read about it. This is a picture of the rubble that was created when the old Edgewood Avenue Bridge was demolished because it was structurally unsound and it went right over the Beltline corridor on the east side. So the city contracted with ABI to do the contracting out of the demolition and rebuilding of this bridge, and ABI brought it in on time and on budget. And 90% of this rubble was reused either in the building of the new bridge or in developing the Beltline path when it was put in. Only 10% of this kind of rubble has to go into a landfill. So that's green demolition. Alternative energy is very important. They're trying to put solar panels on shade structures like this that shade a path to bring in solar energy from the sun that can then be transferred over to Georgia Power for our energy grid. And this is a park that we'll talk about more in class 4, I believe, that, this is the first energy cost neutral park in the city, in the state, and one of the earliest in the Southeast and the country. Energy cost neutral means the amount of power that is brought in by those solar panels and transferred to Georgia Power totally offsets the cost of lighting this park at night and having plugs for leaf blowers and, music events and things like that. Now we're going to talk about the Arboretum, and that's going to close out our class for today. I'm going to let you read the words on this, but I want to talk while you're looking at the picture and seeing what kinds of trees have been planted. Trees Atlanta has been around for more than 20 years, and it's a nonprofit citizens group that's dedicated to protecting and improving our urban environment by planting and conserving trees. I'm sure you're all familiar with Trees Atlanta. And spearheaded by Trees Atlanta, the Atlanta Beltline Arboretum, or Tree Botanical Garden, will preserve and expand the city's urban forest while increasing our canopy cover and providing shade. It's going to provide opportunities for educational programming like a botanical garden does. It's going to help create an attraction that's city, regional, and nationwide interest. It's going to enhance the function, connectivity, and appeal of the Beltline light rail and trail facilities. Now here's information about the Arboretum on the west side. And the Arboretum is going to be a large-scale reforestation of the corridor. This average 100-yard wide rail corridor didn't have trees on it because the railroad companies came in the 1800s when they were building the belt lines and cut all the trees down. So the only trees that are left were weed trees that have sprouted up since the railroad quit maintaining the corridors because they weren't using them anymore. So we got to reforest all this 22 miles of acreage. And Trees Atlanta has divided this into 5 segments: creek restoration, urban forest restoration, Piedmont urban upland forest rehab, neighborhood woodland rehab, and industrial reclamation. Different strategies for the reforestation will be used depending on the conditions and the surroundings of that part of the corridor. With this effort realized, the Arboretum is going to help Atlanta fulfill the name City of Trees. Okay, so I'm going to stop the presentation here. We're going to start next week talking about historic preservation, and I will quit sharing my screen and open things up for questions.
You all know how to unmute, so unmute if you have questions. Or even if you just want to say something.
I want to know what are native grasses. On one of the things it said they're planting native grasses.
Native grasses are things that are considered grass, not just what you'd put in your front yard and mow, but meadowland grasses. The kinds of grasses that used to grow in areas that weren't forested in the natural landscape. There were forests and there were glades and meadows and other things like that that were naturally came about. And those types of native grasses, some that are short, some that are tall, are what's getting planted.
If you remember, any of you who went to the presentation by the butterfly lady, would have been last spring. I don't know, time flies when you're having fun. It was sometime. And she talked about native grasses as being one of the most important elements in being able to continue and protect other kinds of species. Like she was talking about monarch butterflies and that it's that not the soja that you can mow and it looks gorgeous in your front yard, but the
and have
more,
to water a lot.
Yeah, exactly. But the more wild and crazy grasses.
Right. And the other thing they do besides attract other types of nature, like butterflies and other types of insects, is that they help solidify the soil so that it doesn't wash away in one of our Atlanta gully washers at 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and I like native grasses because, like you said, we unfortunately now call them weeds, but I think I wish we all could have native grasses lawns.
Yes, that would be nice.
Amy, go ahead.
Yes. Do you know by any chance who the landscape architect is on the ABI? Is that Ed Doherty or his son by any chance?
That name is very familiar. The two pictures that I showed you on the slide that is not either of their names, Doherty.
Okay.
But that name is.
He's like the landscape architect of all of old Atlanta, just so famous. I was just curious.
He may be involved in some way, either publicly or privately, but he's not either of those two people that I pointed out. And I'm sorry, but I'm blanking. The woman's name is, no, I'm not even going to come up with her first name. They're all people that I know and talk to at meetings, but they don't remember my name and I don't remember theirs.
When you say arboretum, I think of a place like Botanical Gardens or something you go to. But this is, you consider all the plantings along the whole length of the Beltline as arboretum?
Yes, actually, when the Beltline was in its formative stages as it was being born, the Botanical Gardens was looking at building an arboretum someplace in Atlanta. And they heard about the Beltline and they thought, well, why would we build an arboretum in one location in Atlanta and have to build a big parking lot and have everybody drive to it? We could plant all the way around the whole 22 miles of the Beltline, and Trees Atlanta would have this arboretum that people could visit by walking to it, by eventually riding the train, by riding their bicycles by it. And the trees that are put in have little granite markers that tell you what kind of tree it is, what its species is, what its genus is. There are all kinds of things. Over here where I live on the east side of town, a lot of oaks and magnolias, because that's what the east side had a lot of, but also pecan trees and tulip poplars. In other parts of town, there may be other trees that were more plentiful in another area.
You know, Lucy, just to tell a story, Nancy and I happened to be headed out the door to walk our dogs, and the newest development on Hamilton Avenue, the 630, whatever the heck it is like right across the street from us. So we go around the corner, right, you know, where we watch all the craziness going on. We happened to do that when there were 4 what we consider to be official looking people gathered at the driveway. And so my Nancy, who's never known to be shy, said, hold the dog, and I have the dogs. And she said, hi, are you here to talk about the trees? Because one of our biggest concerns was a huge, wonderful, glorious tree from our perspective that was back in the back of the area that was being developed. And we wanted to know what they were doing. And sure enough, one of them was the Beltline arborist, and the Atlanta arborist had just left. And I share this story because I want people to know how seriously they take this. It's not like, oh yeah, well, that's fine. So they were standing there talking, and she said, the woman was the Beltline arborist, and I don't know her name either, Lucy. But she said, the Atlanta arborist just left, and that's the tree we were looking at. And she said, the problem is, as soon as you remove the lime that has been dumped from the smelting plant that was originally there, the tree will fall over because the lime has damaged the base. And she looked at us. It was very interesting. She said, you live right over there. And we said, yeah. She said, you see the top. And the top looks healthy and beautiful and brilliant. We look at the bottom. And when we look at the bottom, as soon as we take all this lime out of here, we're going to see how damaged that is, and you're going to lose it. And I just thought that was fascinating, as much as we were sad to hear that. And then she went on, you'll love it, Lucy, because then she said, but you don't understand, we're building an arboretum. We're going to plant. And then she started telling me how many trees, telling us how many trees they're going to plant on that section once they get the development finished. And it was
it's going to be thousands upon thousands
exactly
of new
what
trees.
she said. And I am very
not only
sad.
trees, but shrubs and native grasses and all kinds of plants.
So even though I was sad because I didn't want to lose the tree, I knew the tree was done for, it helped me to have data about it, but it also was heartening in terms of the process. So I just wanted to share that story.
Thank you for doing that. That it's also a good illustration of how interconnected all the parts of this project are. If you do one thing, you affect 6 other things or more. And you have to plan it all at once so you don't have a domino effect of unexpected negative consequences.
Right.
So people ask me, why does it take so long to lay a sidewalk? And my answer is because it's not a sidewalk. First, we're doing environmental remediation. Then we're doing underground ductwork and stormwater runoff and utility ductwork. Then we're doing huge amounts of earth moving. Then we're building retaining walls to keep it from all washing away. Then we finally lay the path that you think of as a sidewalk. Then the trees are planted, then the safety patrols come, then the safety cameras get put in. It is huge and it's all interconnected, which is why it takes so long and which is why it costs so much and which is why it's not just a sidewalk.
Well, and we're happy to have the lime gone. Speaking of the remediation element,
yes,
I wasn't really interested in living with the lime anymore, so I'm fine with that. But you know, it's not simple. Ursula, you had your hand up.
Yes, I want to know when you moved to Atlanta, did you purposely look around the Beltline area to buy a house, or did that just happen accidentally?
Who are you
it
asking?
happened. Are you asking me or
No,
Peggy?
Peggy.
Actually, as we were looking, one of the selling features of this house for us, besides the fact that it had windows everywhere, because we just moved from a row house in DC. So, you know, windows with light was a big deal. But the second feature for us was that it was across the street from the Beltline.
Okay.
And people did laugh at us and thought we were being idealistic and just a whole lot of things. And we just said, it's okay. We like the house. We'll wait it out. And we live in an area in Southeast Atlanta that has had its moments of neglect. I mean, if you think about it, Boulevard used to just be the way to get to the penitentiary.
Yes.
I mean, you just take it down and it dead ends in the pen. You know, I still have people who say to me, oh, I know where you live. You live by the pen. And I say, yep, that's the truth. I do. I mean, so there's a lot
also
of stuff.
Down the street from Grant Park.
Yes, exactly. That's what I say. No, I live in Southish Grant Park.
Yeah.
When did you move there? When did you?
2008.
That was very early.
It was, and it was at the time when the real estate market was just taking a huge dive.
Yes.
And we happened to slip in. Thank God, we pray, thank God, every night about this. The DC market hadn't yet collapsed. This one had just started, so we were able to make the transition. Mary, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I feel like where I'm living has the best feature in that we have the north side Beltline Trail. And I love it because it's got this woodsy area. And yet they are still planting more trees along that pathway. And I have seen these young men from Trees Atlanta wrestling with hoses coming down the hill to make sure that those new trees got enough water to get a good start.
Yep.
So it's very impressive, the work they have going out there.
That's a great point. Not only does Trees Atlanta do all the plantings, but they have committed to taking care of all the plantings for 3 to 5 years until they get well established and can survive on their own in the Atlanta climate. And you're right. I think the North Side Trail is an unknown gem along the Beltline because most people who take the bus tour, unless they live in that part of town, didn't know that there was a piece of Beltline open up there.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
Any other questions, y'all? You know how I feel about it, so I can't ever help myself. There's always a story I have to tell because.
Well, I'm very glad you do, Peggy. That's wonderful.
Well, I was glad to hear that when you talk about native grasses, because I feel like I have a one-woman campaign against lawns. I think lawns are the worst thing for the environment.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, you have to have this equipment to kill it, and then you have to fertilize it, and then you have to cut it. Anything
Yes.
native. I think crabgrass is just wonderful. You can't kill it. It's native.
I'm fine with anything in my grass areas of yard as long as it's green.
Right. That's our motto. If it's green and you mow it, you call it grass.
Exactly.
I love it.
Well, thank you all very much for
Lucy,
being so
thank you.
attentive during our second class. And we'll start with historic preservation next week and go through the rest of the key themes. We're going to talk a bunch about funding next week and a performance report on how things are going. And we'll start talking about trail and park progress. Trail and park progress are primarily going to be class number 4, but we'll start in on park progress at the end of class 3.
Cool. Lucy, you're wonderful. We
Yeah.
appreciate you immensely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for your attention and your interest, and tell everybody about the Beltline.
You got it. I do.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and leave now, and y'all visit as much as you want.
All right,
you,
Lucy.
Lucy.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Appreciate it.